Imagine waking up one morning and being told you can't cross the street anymore. Not because of construction, not because of traffic. Because the street is now a front line, snipers on both sides, sandbags where the fruit stand used to be. The cafe where you had coffee last week, it's a militia checkpoint now. And whether you live or die depends on one thing, the religion printed on your ID card. This is what happened to Beirut in 1975, and it only got worse from there. Last episode, we ended with the bus massacre on April 13, 1975. Phalangist militiamen opening fire on a bus full of Palestinians in Ain el-Rumaneh. 27 people dead. But here's the thing about that day. It wasn't just one attack. Within hours, fighting had spread across Beirut. Snipers appeared on rooftops. Checkpoints went up on every major road. And something that had been simmering for years suddenly boiled over. Over the following weeks, the fighting would stop and start. Ceasefires were announced, dozens of them, and broken almost immediately. Prime Minister Rashid Sol's government collapsed. A new military government under Brigadier Nuruddin Rifai lasted exactly 3 days before it collapsed too. Rashid Karami was brought back as Prime Minister, but he had no army willing to intervene and no authority that anyone respected. And as the months dragged on, something irreversible happened. People started moving. Christians living in West Beirut packed what they could and fled east. Muslims in East Beirut did the same in the opposite direction. Sometimes they were forced out at gunpoint. Sometimes they just left because they were terrified. Either way, the result was the same. By late 1975, a line had formed through the heart of Beirut. It ran roughly along the old Damascus Road, from the port area down through the commercial district toward the south. They called it the Green Line. Some say because of the vegetation that grew in the abandoned no-man's land between the two sides. East Beirut became predominantly Christian, controlled by the Kataib and other Lebanese front militias. West Beirut became predominantly Muslim, controlled by the PLO and Kamal Jumblat's Lebanese national movement. One city, two worlds, and a strip of destroyed buildings in between where nobody went unless they wanted to die. Now, if you're imagining this war being fought in back alleys and empty fields, no. Some of the fiercest fighting happened in the most glamorous buildings in the Middle East. Starting in October 1975, the area around Beirut's hotel district, the Mainet El Hosn neighborhood along the waterfront, became a full-blown war zone. Remember, we talked in episode 2 about Beirut as the Paris of the Middle East. The Holiday Inn, the Phoenicia, the St. George, the Hilton, these were the crown jewels of that era. International businessmen, Gulf tourists, European diplomats, that was last decade. Now militiamen were fighting floor by floor through these buildings. The Holiday Inn, at 26 stories, became the most contested prize. Whoever controlled the upper floors controlled a massive sniper position overlooking the port and the commercial district. Palestinian and leftist fighters from the national movement held it first. Kataib fighters launched assault after assault to take it. The fighting went on for months. Fighters would take a floor, lose it, take it back. They punched holes through walls to move between rooms. They used the elevator's shafts to move between levels. At one point, Kataib fighters reportedly drove a car bomb into the lobby of the Holiday Inn. By March 1976, the leftist Palestinian coalition had largely won the Battle of the Hotels. But won is a strange word when all you've captured is a series of burned-out shells. The hotel district, once the symbol of everything beautiful about Beirut, was gutted. Over 1,000 fighters died in those buildings. And the Holiday Inn still stands today, a hollow skeleton on the Beirut waterfront. Nobody ever rebuilt it. If there's one day that captures just how sick this war became, how fast humanity can disappear, it's December 6, 1975. Black Saturday. That morning, the bodies of 4 young Phalangist militiamen were found in East Beirut. They'd been ambushed on a road outside the city, shot, and reportedly mutilated. When word spread, the reaction was immediate and horrifying. Phalangist fighters set up checkpoints across East Beirut and the port area. And they started checking ID cards. In Lebanon, your ID card listed your religious sect. If you were Muslim, Sunni, Shia, Druze, it didn't matter. You were pulled out of your car, taken aside, and in many cases shot on the spot. Some were taken to the port area and executed. Some were killed right at the checkpoints, in front of other people waiting in line. Between 150 and 200 Muslim civilians were killed that day. Not fighters, civilians, workers, shopkeepers, people who had been driving to their jobs. Killed because of a line on a piece of paper. The Muslim side retaliated. Leftist and Palestinian fighters set up their own checkpoints in West Beirut, pulling out Christians and killing them. The exact numbers are disputed, but the violence went both ways. Black Saturday changed something in people's minds. Before that day, some Beirutis still believed this was a political conflict that could be resolved. After Black Saturday, it was sectarian. It was personal. People stopped seeing neighbors. They started seeing enemies. And the city's division hardened into something permanent. January 1976. The war was 9 months old, and it was about to produce something that would define its character for the next 15 years. The cycle of massacre and counter-massacre. On January 18th, Lebanese front militias, primarily Kateb forces, attacked the Karantina district in East Beirut. Karantina was a slum area near the port, home to a mixed population of poor Muslims, Kurds, Syrians, and Palestinian refugees. It was a Muslim pocket inside Christian-controlled East Beirut, and the militias wanted it gone. The assault was overwhelming. Fighters moved through the narrow streets, shooting. Homes were set on fire. Residents who tried to flee were gunned down. The estimates vary widely, but somewhere between 600 and 1,500 people were killed. The survivors, thousands of them, were loaded onto trucks and dumped in West Beirut. Then the district was bulldozed, literally flattened. The images from Karantina were broadcast on television, and the response came 2 days later. On January the 20th, PLO fighters and Lebanese National Movement militias attacked Damour, a Christian town, about 20 kilometers south of Beirut on the coastal highway. Damour's population was mostly Maronite Christian. The attackers overran the town, going house to house. Civilians were killed. Churches were desecrated. The population, around 25,000 people, fled north toward East Beirut. Estimates of the dead range from 150 to over 500. Each side pointed to the other's massacre as justification for their own. Karantina justified Damour. Damour justified the next atrocity, and the next one justified the one after that. This is the logic that would drive the Lebanese Civil War for 15 years. Every horror was framed as a response to someone else's horror. Nobody was ever the one who started it. And the people who paid the price? The same ones who always do. Families. Old people who couldn't run fast enough. Children. Now, through all of this, people were trying to stop the fighting, seriously trying. Lebanon's President Souleymane Frangieh, remember, he was the compromise Maronite candidate from Episode 2's era, attempted to hold the country together. But Frangieh was himself a warlord from the north, close to the Maronite militias, and the Muslim side didn't trust him. In February 1976, Syria's Hafez al-Assad brokered what became known as the constitutional document. This was supposed to be the grand bargain. Muslims would get more political representation, the ratio of parliamentary seats would shift from 6 to 5 in favor of Christians to 50-50, and the Prime Minister would gain more power relative to the President. On paper, it addressed many of the grievances that had fueled the conflict. Kamal, the Druze leader of the Lebanese national movement, rejected it. He and the PLO were winning on the battlefield. Why accept a compromise when total victory seemed possible? The leftist Palestinian alliance was advancing into the Christian heartland of Mount Lebanon. They wanted a complete overhaul of the political system, not tweaks. And this is the moment when everything shifted, because Hafez al-Assad was watching all of this very carefully. And he did not want the PLO and the Lebanese left to win. Here's where the story takes a turn that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. In June 1976, Hafez al-Assad, the Ba'athist president of Syria, the self-declared champion of Arab nationalism, the man who had positioned himself as the great defender of the Palestinian cause, sent his army into Lebanon to protect the Christians. Wait, what? Here's the logic. Assad didn't care about ideology. He cared about control. A PLO leftist victory in Lebanon would create a radical state on his border that he couldn't control. Worse, it might provoke an Israeli invasion, and the last thing Assad wanted was Israeli troops in Lebanon, right next to Syria. And if Lebanon's Christians were completely defeated and the country was partitioned, that would also be a disaster for Syrian influence. So Assad chose to prevent anyone from winning outright. He'd already been sending signals. In January 1976, Syrian-controlled Palestinian units, the Sa'ika Brigade, had entered Lebanon to pressure the PLO. By April, Syrian troops entered the Bekaa Valley, and on June 1, 1976, a full-scale Syrian military intervention began. Roughly 30,000 troops crossed the border. They fought the PLO, they fought Kamal Jumblat's forces. Syria, the supposed champion of the Arab cause, was now at war with the Palestinians. The leftist Palestinian alliance was stunned, and Jumblat appealed to the Arab world for help. The PLO accused Assad of betrayal, but nobody came to their rescue. The Arab states were divided, and nobody wanted to confront Syria directly. Almost overnight, the military balance flipped. The Christian forces, who had been losing ground for months, suddenly had the most powerful army in the region on their side. With Syrian forces now in the picture, the Christian militias went on the offensive, and their primary target was a place called al-Zaatar, the Hill of Time. It was a Palestinian refugee camp in the northeastern suburbs of Beirut, inside Christian-controlled East Beirut, home to somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 Palestinians. The siege began in the spring of 1976, but it intensified dramatically after the Syrian intervention. Kataeb, Tigers militia, and Guardians of the Cedars forces surrounded the camp completely. They cut off water, food, and electricity. And then the shelling started. Residents later described shells falling at a rate of 3 per minute during the worst bombardments. For 52 days, the camp held out. On August 12, 1976, al-Zaatar fell. What followed was a massacre. As civilians tried to evacuate through militia checkpoints, fighters separated the men from the women and children. Many of the men were executed. Others were beaten, humiliated, killed along the roads leading out of the camp. Historians estimate somewhere between 1,500 and 4,000 people died throughout the siege and its aftermath. Around 12,000 survivors were displaced. The camp was then bulldozed, just like Karantina, erased from the map. Al-Zaatar became one of the defining atrocities of the Civil War. For Palestinians, it sits alongside Sabra and Shatila and Deir Yassin in the long catalogue of displacement and destruction. And here's the bitter irony that survivors pointed out. Syria, which claimed to be their protector, had enabled the very forces that destroyed them. By the fall of 1976, even the Arab world had to admit this couldn't go on. Too many people were dying. The images from al-Zaatar had horrified the region, and the spectacle of one Arab army fighting Palestinians on behalf of Christians was, to put it mildly, embarrassing for everyone involved. On October 17, 1976, an emergency Arab League summit convened in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Lebanon, and the PLO sent representatives. The result was a deal: an immediate ceasefire and the creation of the Arab Deterrent Force, a 30,000-strong peacekeeping army that would be deployed throughout Lebanon under the nominal command of Lebanon's new president, Elias Sarkis. Sounds reasonable, right? There was just one problem. The Arab Deterrent Force was almost entirely made up of Syrian troops. About 25,000 of the 30,000 soldiers were Syrian. The other Arab countries contributed token forces that were quietly withdrawn within months. So the Arab Deterrent Force was, in practice, a Syrian occupation with an Arab League stamp of approval, and the Arab League would foot the bill. The ceasefire did hold, mostly for a while. The first phase of the Civil War was technically over. An estimated 60,000 people had been killed in just 19 months. Hundreds of thousands had been displaced. Beirut was physically divided, psychologically shattered, and Syrian troops were now a permanent fixture in Lebanese life. They wouldn't leave for nearly 30 years. But if you thought this was the end, that the Riyadh Agreement would bring real peace, well, the ceasefire was just a pause, and the next phase would bring a new player to the battlefield, one that had been watching from just across the southern border the entire time. Next time on the Arab Archive, Israel Invades. The South burns, and a new militia rises from the Shia heartland. Episode 5, coming soon.